Hello and welcome to Economy and Markets TV, where we have conversations with a purpose. Today we're going to take you around the world of economic and financial news like we do each and every Friday. I'm your host, Dave Okenquist, Senior Research Analyst here at Dent. And joining me, as always, is the editor of Boom and Bust, Mr. Rodney Johnson. Rodney, how are you today?
I'm well, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing well. Actually, I'm a little bit under the weather, if you can't tell, so hopefully I won't sneeze or cough or have the sniffles here, so I'm going to try to power through. So I do apologize to all of you watching in advance for that. Now, Rodney and I, we cover the most important topics of the week each and every Friday. We try to limit each topic to 2 minutes or less, enforced by this bell. That's to keep both of us in line, though. I do take my dictatorial power seriously. If I need to keep going, I will. So, Rodney, let's get into I think the news that's been dominating this week and really kind of last week is the federal government shutdown. It continues. It's the big fight over the border wall, this $5.7 billion problem that the Democrats don't want to allow that money to the president. The president gave an Oval Office speech on Tuesday night trying to make his case. Yeah. There's been sort of a deal floated that maybe in exchange for the 5.7, some moderate Republican senators apparently offered amnesty for the DACA or Dreamers, the temporary protected status people. I think that totals anywhere between 4 and 5 million people, plus some other stuff. And I believe the news came out as the Democrats said no. So we are still at a standstill. What is going on with this, Rodney?
Well, it's what we've seen for a long time. It's ideological positioning where, over less than 0.1% of the budget, people take these positions and then won't move. It's unfortunate because politics is the art of compromise, right? It is what it is. There is a segment of the nation that wants a wall. There's a segment of the nation that doesn't. It's reflected in Congress. And so the idea that you would say, well, we're going to stop the functioning of the government over this, I think it's beyond most people, certainly beyond me, to say that this makes sense. I have heard of the proposed deal. It mirrors something that came up when Trump was first in office. Probably makes sense. There's a group of the nation that wants to have some sort of amnesty program or path for children who were brought here very young, grew up in the United States, but now face deportation because their parents brought them here when they were 2, 3, 4 years old. That makes sense, right? But it's kind of all tied together in the fact that what we really have is a Congress that isn't doing its job. They are not legislating. They're not taking on the thorny issues. And so you're left to wonder what they do, which appears to be prepare for the next election cycle, whatever it is. And then what we get is a government shutdown. It's starting to hurt. I mean, you had the federal employees missing their paychecks for the first time yesterday, and we're now the longest shutdown in history, which is kind of a weird title to have. I think we'll reach a deal. I hope we reach a deal. I hope it is not the president using emergency powers because that just further dilutes emergency powers. And he won't be the first. He'll just be the next in a long line of presidents who have reached to say, well, this is an emergency, so I'm going to do X. By that logic, everything's an emergency. And it just now you have total control with whatever group happens to have that power.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it seems like this gridlock in Congress is really intensified since the Obama administration, right?
I don't know. There was a period of comity, you might say, if you go back to the mid-'80s, with Speaker Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. And, there was certainly rough and tumble politics, but things did happen. But if you look at it, we were coming out of a very difficult point economically, and we were still worried about Russia and other things. Yeah. And so we had a focus that kind of brought us together as a nation. Now things are pretty good, and so we're left to these ideological fights.
Yeah, we're turning our rhetorical guns on each other. Real quick before we move on, do you have a forecast here about when this thing's going to end?
Oh, I wish I could say timing. I don't expect it to go another 2 weeks. Either they're going to reach a deal or president's going to invoke his emergency powers and start building this darn thing, and then they're just going to fight in the courts.
Sounds
I
great.
don't think the federal employees will miss 2 paychecks.
Good. That'd be good news for them. Yeah, we certainly don't want any pain on that end. They're not a part of this fight, right? They're just the casualties. Yeah. All right, so let's move on to something else. What's going on in the Fed? There's some kind of talk about Chair Powell said we're kind of concerned about lower inflation now. We were concerned about higher inflation before, and we're going to become more data dependent. That sent the markets higher, but then yesterday he was at the Economic Club of Washington doing a Q&A, and he says we're going to have to be patient, and we're going to keep shrinking this balance sheet, which probably brings concerns about liquidity, Rodney. So then stocks kind of fell off on that. What's going on with Chair Powell? Is this confusing now? Is it nobody likes him? It doesn't seem like.
Well, it's interesting because we could replay segments of this particular show from a month ago, 2 months ago, 4 months ago, because this is what we said,
right?
That we would get the raise in December. We may or may not get one in January. The Fed would raise a really big banner saying we're data dependent, we're data dependent, we're data dependent. And they would also keep in the background shrinking their balance sheet, which is a tightening. And so it does constrain not just the U.S. economy, but the world economy, because the world works on dollars. And I have written and said many times, I don't know how that's going to play out. We've never printed $4 trillion out of thin air to kind of push an economy. And so we've never shrunk the balance sheet by what will be $2.5 trillion to try and unwind it. And so we got a lot of weird things coming our way. But the whole data dependent thing, it breaks my economic heart to hear it. Because it tells me that central bankers for the Federal Reserve of the United States of America, arguably the smartest people in the room, are saying, we don't know. And I think that's a really poor answer. It leads me back every time to the Taylor rule. Make it mechanical. We all know what's coming. Get rid of all of this angst that happens now, because now we have to watch every piece of data. I mean, by definition, we have to watch every ISM number, every employment number, everything to see if that foreshadows a turn at the Fed. And that's a terrible way to run an economy.
Yeah, bad news there, and everybody panics. Oh, what's the Fed going to do? What are they going to do? Yet, now just to go back, though, just maybe a month or two ago, before this December rate hike, there was this idea that the Fed was just sort of, we're on a path here, we're raising rates, and we got our blinders on, and that's it, which maybe angered some people, but at least that was a path. So I could sort of see now they're shifting gears here. So that means, will we get these rate hikes in 2019? No, so now nobody knows?
Well, that's it. Nobody knows. And it is the stock market. It is. Anybody who says it's not the stock market is being disingenuous, because unemployment is under 4%. Inflation, which I know we'll get to, is very tame. And the Fed has met its goals. So the only thing that has changed since October is the stock market started puking on itself, and that made people nervous. So the Fed is definitely trying to make sure that the stock market remains stable and or growing as well.
Absolutely. So you mentioned inflation, so let's move into that news that came out this morning. U.S. inflation from the month of December actually fell 0.1%. This was the first dip in 9 months. Now, if you look at the yearly gains, which is really what, I think the markets really pay more attention to, it was up 1.9% overall for the year. Big ticket items here, food up 1.6%, energy down 0.3%. And actually for the month, gasoline fell 7.4%. My bill for filling up my truck, thanks you for that, or not you, but just in general. But core inflation, which strips out food and energy, up 2.2%. That's kind of right around the Fed's 2% goal. Now, I know the Fed uses a different kind of measure here, but this is the BLS CPI is the one that most people pay attention to. So just seeing this decline, Rodney, though, so is all this inflation fear over now?
It's not over, but certainly this takes the wind out of it, as it's been for some time. We've been watching inflation trend lower as energy prices have just gotten monkey hammered over the past several months. And you've also seen home prices start to come in some. The yearly changes are still high because of what happened at the beginning of 2018, but you saw home prices go flat, and that being over 30% of CPI, that makes a difference. And so when you get home prices flat to down a bit, you get energy prices, tanking over the months, that of course is going to bring in CPI, and the Fed recognizes that. And so they know that they have met that goal. So but I do caution people that inflation for energy will come back. I mean, we've seen energy have its best run in, I think, forever over the last week and a half or so in terms of gaining continuously. And so you're going to see that build back in. Will we get huge inflation off of this? I don't think so. But on the backside of this, we still have wages. And that's something that has been in the background for some time. We have more cities and states raising minimum wage. We have more companies pledging a raise to minimum wage. And so we are pushing up wages, and we could see that wage-led inflation growth come back a little bit.
Yeah, actually, we saw this last Friday, I believe, from the jobs report, where average hourly earnings were up 3.2% for the year,
Right.
which is sort of finally, excuse me, digging itself out of that hole. And we expect this to sort of trickle through to the rest of the economy as energy rises as well. And as you mentioned, shelter, that's up 3.2% for the year, and also medical care. That's never really going down, right? That's up 2.6% for the year, and that's probably. Would you say that's an accurate estimation of medical care service payments, Rodney?
Boy, I don't know. If there was one area of the economy that I would love to untangle, it's the healthcare side because everybody wants people to have access to affordable quality care, but we can't seem to, one, agree on what it is, and two, figure out a great way to deliver it. And you look around, people like Singapore have done a good job, but I'm not sure if I want to live in that sort of command economy.
Right.
And so estimating the price on that is very difficult, although 2.6% is low in recent years, but it kind of masks the incredible increases we had over the last decade leading up to it. So.
Absolutely. Now, they may cane you in Singapore, but if you're sick,
Yeah.
they'll at least take care of you and you won't go bankrupt. So
That's right. And you can get an
Straight
MRI for like $300, right? It's real simple. So.
Absolutely. Now, we talked about energy, so let's move into that. Our last topic of the day. Oil is back up, jumping from about $43 a barrel to low 50s. Saudi Arabia, they're going to cut production, so lower global supply, so prices going up. But it's really not that. I mean, I guess $9, $10 is a lot, but it's still quite low in the low to mid 50s, Rodney. So what's kind of your outlook in the short to medium term?
I think oil's going higher. I've been on this side of the fence now for weeks, telling people, look, the Saudis are going to cut supply. I was one of the biggest detractors of this when they announced it in 2016, that they were going to cut supply because they haven't done a good job of sticking together. Well, they did. They started cutting supply in 2017. They stuck together. They drove up prices pretty good for 2017 and 18. But then, of course, Americans were still pumping. And so we have become the largest oil producer on the planet, and we're producing a lot of natural gas as well. And so OPEC is losing market share in that other players are getting big, right? Being us. And so you have that, and you also have this idea of maybe a little bit slower growth than demand. And so what happened is OPEC basically started ignoring their own supply quotas mid last year, pumped a lot more, added to all the supply, and the price came down. So pretty obvious supply demand. And so what they've done is agree to go back to the supply quotas that they agreed to in late 2016, and they're going to do it starting in this year. And so everybody was pumping like crazy to get oil out the door so they could take the last bit of money off the table at the end of last year. And now the quotas are in, and so you're seeing prices go back up. But Americans are still producing. And so we're going to be the beneficiary as the prices go up. We're selling more, we're getting a higher price. I'm pretty good with that.
Yeah, exactly. But I did like the little reprieve we had over the last couple of weeks. When I get gas at $1.90 a gallon, that makes me smile.
Yeah, it should, right? Because you do it on an inflation-adjusted basis. We're really back to where prices were, in the early 70s. Granted, not before the oil embargo,
right,
but still pretty darn low if you look at it as a percentage of our overall budgets.
Yeah, thanks for breaking that down for me, Rodney, as always. Now, looking ahead to next week, that's kind of depend on the shutdown. We might have retail sales, we might have housing starts, we might have industrial production. Rodney, will we have anything to talk about if the government is closed next week?
There's always something to talk about, thank goodness. So I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you have any comments, questions, or if you notice any interesting news items during the week that you'd like us to share, send us to tv@economyandmarkets.com. And we'll see you all next week.